Darren McDuffie, what's going on, man? Welcome to the Living La Vida Low Carb Show.
Thank you for having me, man. Good to see you again. We've met before in person. You know, like I said before we started the podcast, you're the only person I met in person. Wanted to meet Sean Croxton, never got a chance to meet him, but I'm sure glad I got a chance to meet you.
Sean's still out there doing his work, just not in the health realm. I just recently reconnected with him on Instagram. He's got a podcast called Quote of the Day, if you want to go. But yeah, he's such a good guy. And yeah, I think you two will hook up someday. So.
Yeah, I'm planning on maybe taking a trip out to San Diego at some point, and hopefully, you know, I might be able to bump into him.
Yes, I actually did see him in San Diego one time. I was there for some conference I was attending, and he's like, Jimmy Moore's in town. Yo, what's up, y'all? I'm going to go see him, you know, so it was awesome.
Yeah, him and to me, you and him are legends, because when I first started my podcast, I reached out to him and talked to him on the talked to him via phone, and he's like, "Well, go ahead and start your podcast." And he's the catalyst for me starting my podcast in 2014, and then also meeting you. And I think you two guys, he's no longer doing it, but I know you're one of the more longer standing guys out there who's been doing this for a number of years.
Yeah, I started the Living La Vida Low Carb Show 2006. So, I mean, it's like the granddaddy health podcast out there. This thing's like well over 1,600 episodes and counting now. But yeah, Sean was quite prolific doing his thing. And you've been out there now, what, 6 years doing your thing?
Yeah, 2014. And we talked about my rebranding and stuff that I'm going to do, and you're going to do the same thing. But I've just evolved over the years, and I was like, okay, well, my first thing was I've always been a Marvel superhero guy, and I love Marvel superheroes. And I came up with the acronym FAT for Perfectly Healthy and Toned. But now I've kind of evolved into some different things and become a little bit more spiritual and want to show the world more of that side. And I think that's what's needed right now. We're going through a lot of stuff. And I noticed you've talked about your childhood traumas and all these things that have happened, and you're evolving as well. So I think that the world needs that now.
Darren, can I tell you, it's so disheartening when I hear people say things along the lines of stay in your lane, you're the keto guy, you're not allowed to talk about whatever subject that's not keto. And I struggle with that, because I'm like, look, Jimmy Moore, the guy you like, keto guy, I'm more than just keto, I promise you. And same with you, you know, you're more than all the things you've been talking about. Where do you think that comes from, that people feel like you're not allowed to talk about anything except in this very narrow road of what you've carved for yourself?
I think that people get used to seeing you in one particular facet. And it's hard, even with actors. If you see Denzel Washington in one movie, or see him in another movie, or any actor, Tom Hanks or whoever, we want to remember that person is that one person we remember in that one movie.
Right.
And we forget that we're multifaceted beings, so that we have so many chances to go off in different directions and do different things and show different sides of us. It's like going to a job every day, and you know that you want to do something else, but you're stuck in that job, and people just say, hey, well, he's just done this for so many years, let him keep on doing that. No one likes change. We don't want to embrace change, and we don't like change.
They take you for granted.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And it's unfortunate. Like, I remember, to your Hollywood actor analogy with Denzel, look at what happened to Jim Carrey. His first movie was Ace Ventura.
Mm-hmm.
What did he do down the line? The Truman Show. Couldn't be two more opposite styles.
Exactly.
And yet he was amazing in both.
Yeah, but what is he doing now? He's talking more about spirituality and different things, and people think he's crazy.
And his
but
art.
And he's showing another facet of himself, and people are like, well, just stick to acting. Yeah. But I think, again, we're multifaceted. We should show different sides of ourselves, and the message that is coming through for a lot of people may be the message that someone needs to hear. So what you're bringing, what I'm bringing, what other people are bringing might be the message that someone needs to hear, and we can't always get involved in just seeing one person in one particular facet of life.
You know what changed Jim Carrey, by the way? I've read a lot of interviews, big fan of his work. The thing that changed him was that Andy Kaufman movie, where he poured himself into the role of this very disturbed mentally. And he got to the point where he was so much that character that when he came out of it, he didn't fully get Jim back. And that's when he started going introspectively and saying, whoa, 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 who am I? You know, I poured myself into this role, but now I feel a calling, and now he's doing all the artwork and all the other things. And he's a perfect example of what you and I are talking about, kind of rebranding yourself, and not just for the sake of rebranding yourself, but to say, hey, we have more to offer this world.
Right, right. And I think that, you know, you get into, when you look at different aspects of life, people who are acting, people who are doing things, the most important things are people who continue a career. I mean, I'm a big hip hop guy. I listen to LL Cool J and all kind of other rappers. But you look at LL Cool J's career, Dr. Dre's career, people, they reinvented themselves over and over and over again to remain relevant in the scene, because if you don't, you're going to die out.
Right.
And everybody has to reinvent themselves at some point or another.
Well, look at LeBron. LeBron
Yeah.
right now is still one of the biggest names in the NBA, but he's already set himself up for his post-playing career, you know, moving out to LA and trying to get, you know, all of the productions, everything that he's doing. And it's like, these guys, they know that. They are way ahead of the curve. It's just kind of an interesting thing that people want to peg you as this one thing. And I guess LeBron will always be most known as famous basketball player, probably on the Mount Rushmore of NBA players someday. But yeah, people just don't want you to go outside the box of what they see you as. It's kind of like the guy that played Urkel on television. Like, he's forever struggled as an actor because everybody sees Jaleel White, I believe is his name.
Yeah, Jaleel White. Yeah.
And so it's like, it's unfortunate that we kind of have this view. Oh, okay, Jimmy Moore, you're the keto guy. You know, and it's just unfortunate you can't see them as anything more than that. I mean, how boring is the human race if you're only one thing?
Yeah, it's like we have to brand ourselves to be known. But when you try to go in a different direction, people are like, oh, well, you're the keto guy, or oh, you're the guy who talked about Perfectly Healthy in Tone, or whoever it was. It's like you can't talk about or bring different aspects into what you know, and solidify it into what you want to do.
Yeah. So, Darren, there's a lot going on in 2020, and your personal life was kind of in turmoil, as has mine been even before COVID-19, and then the race relations things popping up, social injustice. What's happening in the world right now? It just seems like everybody's being forced into having conversations that they don't necessarily want to have, some of which are good, and some of which may not be as productive. How do you help people circumnavigate what they should be engaged in?
Well, here's what I do. I've been more of a hands-off person, because my philosophy around all of this is that you can't force people to change. They have to want to change on their own. And for most of us, forcing us to change, it's kind of like you break up with a girlfriend, or you break up with your wife or whatever, and you're constantly bothering her and you're saying, hey, you know, I want to get back together. That's an immediate turnoff. The other person is going to turn and go the other way. What I think is happening in the world right now is that you're starting to see a lot of people who are suddenly saying, hey, well, there's some social injustice going on in the world, and we want to jump on this. And this is more for your Caucasian people. And even if you go back in history, Jimmy, there were people who, white people, who joined on the front lines in the civil rights movement to say, hey, this is wrong. And now you're seeing a lot of people who are taking that stand again and saying, hey, this is wrong, to see, you know, these young black males or whomever it is being killed by the police and nothing is being done. If you look at historically, over a point of time, black people have always been at odds with the cops. Even in the civil rights movement, they sick dogs on us. They sprayed us with water. And going back to Rodney King a couple of years ago, these guys beat him in the street. And granted, whatever he did is whatever he did, but these guys were never prosecuted by the law because of what they did. And you could plainly see it on video. To me, you can't be the law and be above the law. There's two different things, two different aspects there. If you are upholding the law, you should be required to work within the parameters of the law. And I don't think a lot of that is happening right now.
Can I ask you a question though? Because it seems to me that because of those things, and I agree with you, horrible, stop. Like we don't stop the killing. But I think what's happened is now all law enforcement has gone into the crosshairs of, I guess, being accused of doing the things that this horrible people that killed George Floyd did, and all the rest, Trayvon Martin, all the rest.
Mm-hmm.
And it's unfortunate that all cops are now being lumped into that same category. Is it all cops, or is it bad cops? And if it's just bad cops, can't you just extract the bad cops? I know some are saying, no, it's the culture of the cops, to the point that we should just, I know, and this is controversial, but the defunding of the police is to kind of sort of drain the swamp of the police sector to try to get new people in there that would not do these things to the Black community. What's your thought on all that?
I think it's a kind of a muddy thing, because you want cops to be able to uphold the law. And my thing is this, is I live my life on the spectrum of all is not all and everything is not everything. And I'll explain that. You can't lump a group of people and say all Black people do this or all white people do that. I think that that's what we do in our society. And part of that, and I quote, and I kind of got this, and this is what was a catalyst for me, as I was looking through your feed that you had one day, and I was seeing some of the responses there, and I responded back. Otherwise, I have seen so many things and I didn't want to respond to them, but it's just something that kind of pulled me to respond to your feed on that day. But I think, for lack of a better word, we tend to do that in our society. We take people and we lump them into groups. All Black people are not the same. All white people are not the same. All Hispanic people are not the same. But because we have the media, which is constantly, and I think Ron, I listened to Ron Garrett's interview with you, and I think Ron was saying the same thing, is that the media portrays people, even in movies, there's certain stereotypes that are portrayed amongst different ethnic groups that are not always the best things. So if that's the only thing that you're seeing, or the only thing that you've ever had as a bad experience, you, for instance, bumped up into a Black person, you're white, you bumped up into a Black person and he shoved you back or something like that. You can't base one experience on all the experience that you're going to have. Right. Because if you do that, what you're doing is you are circumventing a belief. You're starting a belief in your head that all Black people are bad. And anytime you believe something, Jimmy, that's what you're going to see. Life plays that on us. Life's like, hey, I have this belief, and that's all you're ever going to see. I always tend to tell myself, I'm going to surround myself with good people. Good people are going to surround me. And that's what I tend to encounter in my life. But this whole thing that we have, these stereotypes, and this whole thing that we have, that grouping people together, no, you can't do that. I certainly believe that there are good cops. I ran into some good cops. I ran into some bad cops. I've been stopped 4 times. 4 different times on my occasion. And one cop I ran into was Black. He talked to me like I was a great guy. He said I had a headlight out, wrote me a ticket. I've talked to 3 white cops. 3 white cops, and I'm not lumping everybody in, but the 3 white cops that I've been stopped by. I got stopped one time going on the turnpike in Orlando. They stopped me, called another cop, searched my whole car. I asked them why they were searching my car. They said, we have reason to believe that, some people up here are transporting drugs. I was like, well, I'm not transporting drugs. But the questions that they had for me and the way that they asked the questions toward me made me think that they were trying to get me to be mad or whatever. And I stood there calm because I know I didn't do anything. And the 2 other occasions that I had with cops were the same thing, where they didn't speak to me with respect. I felt as though they were talking down upon me. And I think that a lot of Black people have had these encounters with white cops that where they've felt like they were spoken down upon and kind of aggravated or made to be something that they didn't want to be. And the situation gets out of hand. And I think that's what's happening with a lot of things that are going on today.
And that's unfortunate. By the way, can you bump because you're slipping down, and all I'm seeing is your nose now. So there you go. Okay. I was like, I want to see your face, man.
Yeah. Okay.
See that. So hearing those accounts breaks my heart. And I believe you. Like, I know that happened. The problem is why? Like, what would be the motive? I know a lot of people are saying, well, it could be not race related. It could be some other thing. Do you think that's just a distraction trying to ignore the elephant in the room?
No, I think it's definitely race related. I think when you go back, I don't know. I think you mentioned by the documentary 13 on Netflix, and a lot of the things that have been perpetuated upon blacks, Hispanics, is that, we are drug dealers, we're this, we're that. But we're getting into an age right now where black people are able to afford things. There's certainly people out there who are wealthy, they're able to afford nice cars, they're able to afford these things. And every time a cop stops them, it's not a matter of selling drugs. Hey, this guy might be a lawyer. And I've heard several accounts where teachers at Harvard, teachers within teaching at really nice schools have been stopped for no reason at all because they're black, because the cop doesn't know them. And I think the thing is that there's a certain spectrum in our community, a certain on law enforcement, they think that all black people are bad. And that's not always necessarily true. And I think that, go ahead.
What's going to change that? Like, to me, that sounds like a training issue.
Mm-hmm.
Train that out. And I'm not talking about the whole, racial sensitivity. I think some of that can be counterproductive because some white people being forced to attend one of those, they're not paying attention. But is there a way to include it in the regular training of everybody, black and white cop and Hispanic cop and everybody, that, okay, let's not now you have to profile to a certain degree. That's kind of in the job description of being a cop. But I think being more cognizant of, I guess, the optics of it as well. A cop's job has to be so hard because they know they're being filmed now. I mean, thank God for cell phone cams. Mm-hmm. Or they're all wearing body cams now as well, or we wouldn't have any of the footage of any of these things happening.
Well, it is a sticky slope. And I think that it does become a training issue. And for lack of a better word, I think when people become cops, there's a certain amount of responsibility that comes with that. And I also think that there's a certain amount of power. And many people do not know how to handle power. When they get a certain amount of power, they go off the deep edge. And you have some people who know how to respect power and know how to yield it. But for lack of a better word, I just think that there's so many people out there who don't understand the power of having a badge and a gun and what their job is and how they go out and do it every day. And again, it goes back to what I said earlier. You might have a bad experience where you walk up to a car and some guy starts shooting at you and you are constantly on edge. And I think that that's what happens with cops. They're constantly on edge and they're always looking for something bad because it can happen.
I'm going to play a little bit of devil's advocate with you, just kind of get what your feel is on this one. Some people will say, well, those in the black community are taught to fear the cops, that they're going to walk out their door and they're just going to get shot dead for no good reason. And so therefore, that's already in the mind of the person. Not saying that was you when you got pulled over by these three and they searched your car and all the things that happened to you. But there are some, and I've seen some of the videos online, where if the person was more respectful towards the cop, it might have ended a little better than it did. I'm not saying every situation, but that is a part of it, that because of that distrust of the cops to begin with, and then the cops are a little bit, okay, is this a thug criminal? His bias coming into it. It seems like it's this perfect storm for something. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that that's part of it too, Jimmy. I think that, black people have been taught to fear the cops have been taught to fear black people. So you get this little bit of edginess that comes about. What I've noticed with cops is that, again, when I stop for traffic, it's always like this agitation. They're trying to make you agitated to say the wrong thing and escalate the situation. I don't know if there's a good way to, when you do a traffic stop, to be polite, to be respectful, but I think the respect goes both ways. Right. You can't have someone saying, hey, well, why did you stop me? But you can't have, the cop coming up there and agitating the whole situation when it really does not have to be blown out of proportion. It goes back to training. I think it goes back to a certain amount of respect for people and having people skills. And because of the magnitude of the situation, someone can have a gun inside the car. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what the person is transporting. You don't know, what the motive is there. It's always going to be a sticky slope. But I think you can navigate it to the point where it comes out more on the positive end than more on the negative end.
I'll tell you, I was encouraged the other day. I had not seen this viral video before, but it was on Facebook of this cop who was called to a neighborhood, a white cop, and a bunch of young black guys playing basketball. And the complaint by the neighbors was that they were blocking the road and playing basketball and not letting the cars come through. And so he comes out there and, hey guys, I hear you're playing basketball. Yeah, we're playing basketball. Well, there's cars trying to get through here and there was a complaint filed. Yeah. And he's like, shoots the ball. He's like, I don't have a problem with you playing basketball. And he sat there and played basketball for like the next 15 or 20 minutes. And at the end of that, he grabbed the ball and he said, all right, keep playing. I'm obviously no problem you playing, but stay out of the street when cars come. Now, how cool was that? And then he later came back a few days later and he brought Shaquille O'Neal with him. And those kids went wild and Shaq gave them all kind of lessons. That's the kind of positive thing that I think could change the culture of all this. Have you seen that one, by the way?
I've seen that video, and I agree with you. And I think that needs to be the step that needs to be taken. But instead, what I tend to see happen is these guys, there's a complaint. The cop is agitated because maybe he might have had a call earlier in the day. The call didn't go really well. Now he's got to go out and deal with these kids. He says the wrong things to the kids. The kids think that they're disrespectful. And then the whole situation gets blown out of proportion. There was something that I used to do when I played basketball myself in college, was that if I made a bad play, I would just wipe it out my mind and go down the court and say, hey, that's done. And I think a lot of times what happens with cops and just people in general, we tend to take things with us through our days and not realize that, hey, you had a bad call, let it go, and then go on to the next call. But I think it all comes back to respect and being able to talk to people in a human manner and not below them, not make them feel like you're talking beneath them, and making them feel like they're less than what they are,
I wonder if in those situations, and thank you, this is a wonderful conversation, by the way, you and I are having. It helps we're friends, so that helps. But
yeah.
I wonder if after a cop has a traumatic call like that, where they're kind of shook, maybe they sit for a bit to get their mind right, meditate, something, and you send another police officer that has not had a traumatic call that day to go to the scene to deal with the kids playing basketball in the street. There's any number of ways to deal with that so that they don't take the stress of a previous call. A police officer's job at times has to be incredibly stressful. They need to maybe build into the system moments of them to release some of that and to meditate and breathe. I've seen some of these corporations hiring like napping stations where they could just go and relax, and then their minds are refreshed and they're ready to go to another call with a clean slate rather than carrying over that baggage from the previous call.
Yeah, I think it's a lot, because you're dealing with, not only are you dealing with a job, and you know how that is, you're dealing with a job, you might be dealing with a family situation, and I don't care how good you are. I think that most of us carry things with us along in our days. If we have an argument with our wife or girlfriend or whomever it is, we may carry that to work. And then that person who's at work doesn't necessarily have to have anything to do with the argument we have, but for some reason we're taking it out on that person. And I don't know if that's a cop's mentality. Maybe it is. But I think that those things take into respect. And I think all cops should be mentally evaluated on a yearly basis just to see where they are, because you have cops out here that are raping women, all kinds of stuff that are going on. Someone in that type of mind frame needs to be mentally evaluated, especially when you're constantly dealing with people, because people I had a friend that was a social worker, and she got out of the social work because she said she just couldn't deal with it mentally. Being a cop is like social work. You're constantly dealing with people. So you should be evaluated mentally to see if you're at your very best when you're, dealing with people. I also think that cops should take cultural classes to learn how black people are versus white people are versus Hispanics are, because all of us are different in a sense on how we think about things. And if you don't know that culture, you're a white cop, you're placed in the middle of the ghetto. You don't know a thing about black people. You grew up in, so I grew up in South Carolina. I know you're from North Carolina, but you don't,
South.
you're from South. Okay. Okay. So I thought you're from North, but, so you don't know a thing if you're coming from, uh, someplace in California, and you're plucked in a white neighborhood, a black neighborhood, a ghetto neighborhood, and you've grown up in some other place. You don't know a thing about that neighborhood. You don't know a thing about how those people act, or what those people do, and you need to learn about people.
Yeah. You slipped down again. If you could pull the camera, I'm losing your face every time. I don't know if you hit a table or something. He gets excited and all the camera.
No, my thing, I have it's hitting up on my monitor here, and it tends to go back up at a point in time. Yeah.
Keep an eye on that because it kind of goes. So, we have a lot of work to do, and you're definitely articulating that. But what about within the Black community? Because a lot of the concerns that are put out there, and I'd like to hear you address this one, is Black on Black crime, for example, and some of the issues within the Black community, the absence of the father, which the 13th movie kind of explains some of that one as well. Definitely go look at it, guys. It's actually available in total on YouTube to go watch. 13th is the name of the documentary. But what's going on within the Black community that maybe could help with some of these issues?
I think that what you see in the Black community now, and this is one thing I made a pact with myself a long time ago, is not to use the N word, because I think for me, I can't talk for every other person in the Black community. I know some people think it's a term of endearment in the Black community, but for me, I can't expect for someone else not to call me that if I'm calling myself that. And that's the way I prefer to live my life. And when I was younger, I would use the word because to me it was a term of endearment amongst my people or my friends, and we grew up with the word. But as I got a little bit older, I'm like, hey, you know what? I'm seeing myself in a different light. I'm evolving. I don't want to use that word anymore, and I don't use that word towards others.
Can I just, I appreciate the reason why it's used by the Black person. It's to grab back control of that language and say, okay, you're going to mean it as an ugly term towards us. We're going to show you how we'll reinvent that word and make it our own. We'll chop off the end of it and put an A on it, and be awesome. And so I understand the reasoning why, but that's interesting that you decided as an example, ostensibly for others to follow. Hey, I don't say it because I see it as that divisive word again.
Yeah, and I grew up within South. I told you I'm from South Carolina, and that's as far south as you can get.
Where's South Carolina?
Well, growing up there, I just noticed with my family, we never threw that word around.
No, I said where in South Carolina?
Sumter, South Carolina, small town outside of Columbia.
It's about 2 hours away from my house.
Okay, you're in Spartanburg, right?
Spartanburg.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So I know where you are, but we didn't throw that word around a lot.
Really?
We did not throw that word around a lot in my family. But also, you have to look at from a cultural standpoint. For 400 years, Black people have been made to think bad of themselves. I think a lot of things goes back to self-love. And if you're always constantly seeing negative images about yourself, the media portrays a lot of negative energies, negative perception. But if you're constantly seeing those negative images about yourself and nothing is positive, and you're living in the projects or wherever you grew up and there's not much hope there, you're going to tend to sling around different adjectives about yourself. You're going to see yourself as less than. And I think within the Black community, we need to change that as far as how we perceive ourselves, how we think about ourselves, how we're actually living, to know that you can get out. There's more opportunity now than what it's ever been. And it doesn't have to be all this competition. There's enough out here for everyone, and everybody can go get it. But you have to realize that it takes education. You can't always want everything fast. You
Right.
know, we live in a microwave society. Everybody wants everything fast, and they think that it's all about, hey, I'm going to be, I played basketball for many years and thought I was going to go to NBA, but I'm not in the NBA. but but that's the images that are portrayed for amongst a lot of black people, that you have to be a basketball player, you have to be a football player.
Or you
No,
can't.
you don't have to. Yeah, you don't have to be those things. You can be a lawyer. You can be different things, and where you can have a good lifestyle.
Can I just tell you, that's the thing that I think is missing in this conversation is I think the discouragement of this inevitability that the cops are out to get you, that you're downtrodden, that you don't have the same abilities to be able to achieve in America, blah, blah, blah. I think it just subliminally discourages from even trying. And I wish there were ways that we could communicate, hey, you have just as much a chance to succeed at whatever you decide to do, basketball or otherwise. You can succeed. I mean, you're a businessman. You've made something of yourself with what you do, and you're rebranding now. You just use that mind. And I wish we could engage, and this is black, white, and everybody, engage the minds of people and say, no, you are not a victim and a prison to your circumstances. You really are in the country where anything is possible if you put in the effort.
Yeah, and I think that that's you, but also you have to understand that when you are growing up in that type of culture or that type of environment, and that's all you see, a lot of people are just what I call circumstances of their environment. They don't see much. Even I remember growing up in Sumter, I remember the first time I got on a plane, it was going to Las Vegas for a basketball tournament. And basketball has provided me to be able to see a lot of things. But the average person, they don't get that. They don't get to see a lot of things. They might be growing up in the south side of Chicago, and all they know is the projects and where they are. And a lot of what I think, I grew up without a father, and a lot of what I think what's going on within our community is the absence of fathers in the home. I'm not saying all black. There's some fantastic black fathers out there who are taking care of their kids and doing everything that they need to do. But for the most part, a lot of men are growing up without fathers. And because they're growing up without fathers, it's easy to assimilate into a gang. It's easy to start doing what everybody else is doing because you want some sort of protection. You don't want to go down the street and somebody beats you up or shoot you for any reason at all. And I don't think that that's what white people understand, because they don't have to go through those circumstances, because your lifestyle, for the most part, most white people have a different lifestyle. They don't have to go through gangs and all of this stuff. They grow up with both parents in the household, whereas for a large majority of black men, they're growing up with parents. It's even going over my head to think of how many people I knew as a kid that weren't growing up with fathers in their home. I know a ton of them. They knew their fathers, but the fathers were not there in the home. And where you're growing up in that type of atmosphere, it's so easy to fall prey to getting into a gang. But again, that's not an excuse. I was strong enough to make it out, get my college degree, and I know a number of other people who weren't in trouble, who've never been in trouble. But this is a different day. It's a different age. We glamorize a lot of things. A lot of things that we glamorize is materialism, that you have to have certain things to be someone in this society. And a lot of that is pervaded by the media. Again, we're going back to the media, but you have to understand where all this is coming from. There's a cause and effect of everything. And I think people just look at the effect, but they don't look at the cause of how these things come about.
So going to the media, they have long kind of highlighted black male involved in shooting last night, and they always emphasize that. You never really see them say white male in a headline, always black. And I wonder, because they seemingly have done a 180 in the coverage of all the things happening the past few months, Black Lives Matter has become kind of this big rallying call within the media where they seemingly are supporting it. Now, That's a tricky phrase. I definitely want to get your take on this, Darren, because Black Lives Matter, all capital letters, is an organization.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got people that are for Black Lives Mattering, which is the greater social injustice cause. And the two are kind of muddied together. What is your thoughts on those people who are concerned about some of maybe the leftist leanings of the Black Lives Matter movement, that's the capital letters, versus caring about Black Lives Mattering and trying to correct some of these social injustices that we've been talking about here today?
I don't know much about Black Lives Matter, but I know that there's a greater good out there who is, like you said, the Black Lives Matter. And they want to see the justice of cops being held accountable for what they do. Black Lives Matter. I think anytime you have any organization, there's always going to be a more radical leftist organization. That's been America's history.
Right.
You have people out there who are living, white people who are out there living in the prairies and all this stuff, who don't like the government, and they've been trying to overthrow the government or come up with plans or want to have a race war. There's always going to be leftist organizations. So I can't really comment on Black Lives Matter. I don't know much about it, but what I do know is that I want to see people not be the law and above it at the same time. That's what I want to see. And even commenting on your thread, I also want to see we don't want white people to apologize to us. What's done is done. But what we want to do is we want to see a certain amount of equality out of all of this. And I think because of the pandemic, we've been forced to slow down and look at a lot of things and look at where we are right now. But we just want to stop the unnecessary killings going on and cops getting off constantly. And we know, and they're on video, we can see it, that they're on video and they're doing all these things, but and again, they walk free. And it just so happens that it's always a white cop and a black victim. So something is going on there, but I can't comment too much about Black Lives Matter because I don't know a lot about the organization, but I do know that I just want to see, justice done and for black people to stop getting killed over things that they don't need to be killed over.
Agreed. Pull your camera back down again. Keeps flying. Like when you get in a good talk, it just moves up.
Yeah, that's up on my monitor.
I mean, I think we see in getting to kind of that, how do we resolve this? How do we correct these wrongs? Okay, don't apologize, but we want to see these wrongs righted. As of the recording of this, the New York Times just released an op-ed. I don't know if you've seen it or not, but it basically called for the forgiveness of all debt of anyone who is black in America. Now, obviously, it's just an op-ed. It's not policy. Nobody has actually pushed that. But it's like the whole idea of reparations or forgiving debt, somehow trying to equal the playing field. Whereas some people will say, well, wait a minute, there's been affirmative action and various other things to help with that. In fact, I hate to even call it that. I was the victim of not getting a scholarship when I was going to college. They gave it the affirmative action. And in hindsight, I'm glad I turned out okay. Mm-hmm. Glad that they got that leg up to be able to get their education. I hope they became something from that. But some would argue that there's already programs in place that give you the leg up. So what do you think about this idea of somehow giving financial compensation because of does that fix anything?
I don't think so. I think what that whole argument is driven around is the fact that black people were, there was a lot of free labor. During slavery, there was a lot of free labor. A lot of people built their fortunes. A lot of the corporations that are now in America built their fortunes off the backs of black people, and they were never paid for that labor. Will it make us more financially stable? I don't know, because you have some people who get a lump sum of money, they go out and spend it, and then the money's gone. But in some way, shape, or form, I think that we have to start repairing the relationship of what, and it's an ugly mark of what slavery did to black people. And there's a lot of injustices. I remember seeing, just a lot of pictures where black people hanging from trees and white people sitting around and smiling and doing all this stuff. I don't know if you're familiar with the story of Emmett Till, who whistled at a white woman, and It's a kid. He's a freaking kid and got killed. So, and then there's a lot of stuff. You and I are both in nutrition. There's a lady who wrote a book called Medical Apartheid, where a white doctor did experiments on women, with black women, without any type of anesthesia or anything. So there's a lot of stuff in our history that people just want to sweep under the rug that, again, we don't need to bring it up, but we need to kind of, and it sounds like oxymoron, we need to talk about it and go past it and see, how we can better our society.
One thing that keeps getting brought up, Darren, I definitely want to hear your perspective, is we're living in 2020, the most effed up year in the entire history of everywhere.
Yeah.
And some people are like, well, wait a minute. I didn't own any slaves. And no black people today have been enslaved in the traditional sense. So why are we having this discussion? Am I supposed to be held for the sins of my ancestors? And so how do you respond to those people who say those kinds of things?
This is what I think. I think that anything, and you talked about this, we talked about this, that you had traumatic events during childhood. I think that if you've had traumatic events and you've never healed from them, they're passed on from generation to generation to generation. And we can see that. We talk about DNA and genetics and all this stuff within nutrition. It's the same thing. You have these traumatic events that you've gone through, and they're passed down. And some people have never healed. And even though my mom was, and I can remember my grandmother, I used to wait for her to come home, and she was still working for white people. And this was back in the 70s. I think I might have been 5 or 6 years old. I was born in 1970. And I remember waiting for her to come home. And then my mom was, more removed from that. But slavery was not that far down the road as far as people think it is. But I think people tend to think, okay, well, I didn't do this, I didn't do that, and they forget that this stuff is passed down from generation to generation.
We still have people alive today, Darren, who were alive during the colored white.
Mm-hmm.
They're still alive that remember those signs.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. And I think that racism is something that has to be taught. It's not something that we really know. And for lack of a better word, there are people here who are cool with being privileged. They're cool with having that privilege and not having to worry about certain things. I don't know if you're familiar. Oh, I cannot remember his name. The guy, it's Tim something, but he talks about the fact that white people, it was during, I forget what era it was doing, but white people were giving loans to help out the middle class so where they could buy homes where black people were being denied. Think about what would have happened if everything was equal. You wouldn't have so many people living in projects and all this other stuff if the loans were given to black people. But historically, a lot of the things, or a lot of the funding has not been given to the African American population, and we're still at some point suffering from that. So it's a cascade of different things that are going on within our society that keep going on that we need to change in order for things to better themselves. Because ultimately, what affects my community will soon affect your community. It's going to spill over. And you can see that, I think, in the opiate crisis a couple of years ago, even during the drug crisis, when we had that, they were saying, hey, throw all the black people in jail. But when it came to opiates and they realized that more white people were on the opiates, they were saying, well, maybe we need more programs to help these people recover and help these people change their addiction. But there's always been that paradigm of how it's seen white versus black. Black people throw them in jail, white people, let's help them out and help them get over their addictions and all this other stuff. So there needs to be equality on all fronts. And I wanted to tell you this because I think this kind of drives that point home. I was watching something on Netflix. It's about younger prisoners. These kids were committing crimes. White guy murdered a girl. I think he was like 13, 14 years old in Georgia. Well, white guy murdered a young white girl, and he blamed it on a black guy. When they first came out, he blamed it on a black guy. I'm like, oh my God, here we go. Again, and you know, you live in Spartanburg, the woman who killed her kids a long time ago, and she blamed it on a black guy. So we have this thing that is going on. But the thing that I thought interesting in the whole documentary about the young guy was that when it came down and they were showing everything about his documentary, they said, oh, well, it came out that he was sexually abused as a kid. And they kept going on the fact that he was sexually abused. In another segment, there was a black kid. He was with, I think, 3 or 4 other kids. They wanted some money. A white guy came to the ATM. Guy shot, one of the other guys shot the guy and killed him. They got the money for the ATM, took them all down to the police station. It was 3 or 4 of them. There was the one who shot the guy who obviously got time. There was another black guy, and there was 2 white kids. The 2 white kids got plead out. They got a plea bargain, got certain time. The other black kid who was just there, they gave him like 20, 30 years.
Wow.
And he didn't even pull the trigger, and they gave him 20, 30 years. And they didn't say much about his childhood. So that's the paradigm that exists where it's always different. The perception is always different when it comes to white to black. Black is always, hey, throw him in jail, throw away the key. But the white guy is like, oh, he came from a bad background. And you see this exists within our society. If you're a criminal, you shoot somebody, you kill somebody, you rape somebody, everybody should get the same amount of time. It shouldn't be different because you're Hispanic, black, or white. You should get the same amount of time.
Well, look at what the WNBA star Maya Moore just accomplished, getting that gentleman that was imprisoned at 17. Have you heard this story where he was in jail at 17 because he was just accused of somebody? Never did, but they kind of like forced his hand that he had to plead guilty to it. And they're like, oh, no worries. If you plead guilty, we'll only give you a minimum sentence and you'll be out in 5 years, 4 or 5 years. And he did. And then he was in there until he's 40 years old. So now he's missed the prime of his life. He's out, thankfully, thanks to Maya Moore and her efforts. But how many Maya Moores of the world are going to have to individually advocate? And it was 2-3 years that she's been working on this. It's a sad reality, unfortunately.
There's another on Netflix, they call it the Innocence Project, and there's a number of stories just like the one with Maya Moore where these guys have been wrongly accused, falsely convicted, and they spend the majority of their time in jail and they never did anything. And it's sad, but it's the reality that we live in, that I think that for a lot of black men, they're guilty and have to be proven innocent. And the law says you're innocent until proven guilty. And you look at, I watch a lot of documentaries because I try to learn a lot of different things. And the perception of having money versus not having money. Jeffrey Epstein, I don't know whether you saw his documentary about all the sexual abuse allegations that he had, and somehow or another, this guy never got, compared to the time he should have gotten much more. Because he had money, he wasn't prosecuted, or because he had friends in high places, he wasn't prosecuted the way that he should have been prosecuted.
And that's a whole nother story that could take.
Exactly.
Not getting into.
Yeah.
Man, so, I mean, we're not going to solve anything here today, but definitely having these open conversations is what I'm trying to be about. I truly care about people. You've known that about me for a long time. And I'm a part of the solution in having conversations. And they're tough conversations. Like sometimes I'll put things out there and it triggers one person to say something really ugly, taking it the wrong way. And I'm thinking, if it triggers you, it means it's something we need to kind of vet out and talk about.
Exactly. And I mean, I want to commend you for this, because I know that because you're bringing up these things and you're not afraid to bring them out and have people talk about them, you're probably going to lose a lot of your fan base. Yeah. But that's okay. I've always grown up with the idea that you're never going to please everybody. No one person can please everybody, but you're doing the important work. And I think that for a lot of people who are out here following you and these things matter to them, they're going to keep following you. I know I'll keep following you, but I just think that you're doing a lot of work. And I think for the most part, you're doing the work, but you have a lot of people out here who are just sharing things on Instagram and doing all these things, but they're not doing anything to really start the conversation and being a catalyst to bring about change.
And that's pointing, Darren. Can I tell you, I see some things that people write, and it's just this one-sided of lashing out in anger almost. And I'm like, look, see their anger. They can see our anger. And then let's come in the middle and let's have those questions like what we've been talking about here today. Mm-hmm. Let's have conversations, because we're never going to really step forward in this until we have honest discussions about what do you do about black on black crime? What do we do about white cops killing black kids? So I think they're important questions to ask. It's important to vet it out. It's important to have it in an open forum where nobody feels like they're going to be called a racist or be judged or anything. I'm not fearful of any of that, as you're not either. So I'm really happy that you were able to share here today.
Yeah, I think a lot of white people are scared of that, because it's the minute that you say something and it's taken the wrong way, then people say that you're a racist. And that's not always a thing. It's truly things that I watch white people on TV for years and been involved with white people. And there's truly some things that I don't understand that are done. And I'm sure that vice versa, there's truly things that black people do that white people don't understand. But the important thing is that if it's brought about in an intelligent way and you want to speak about it, bring it up and just say, hey, well, why do you guys do this? And it's not
time right here. I want to hear something you don't understand that a white person does. This is going to be fun.
Well, I don't understand what white, well, you put me on the spot here.
Okay, I got one for, I don't understand in the black community, it's a culture thing, why instead of ask, you say ax.
No, I say ask. I think that's it's where you grow up. And I was always taught to speak proper English. My mom was one of those people who, like, my mom would holler at me if I got a C. And she's like,
Mama.
Yeah, and my mom would be like, hey, you speak correct English and you do all this thing. But I think that's more a place where you grow up from. I say ask. I know a lot of people who are educated will say ask. But, I mean, I don't judge people on the way they say things. Right. I judge people on, because I think there's a ton of intelligent people out there who may not pronounce words correctly. You're from South Carolina. You know this. You know we have a slow way of doing things.
I get made fun of because of this accent all the time, Darren.
Well, I'm from the same way. People can't, for some people, they're like, well, you don't sound like you're from South Carolina. I like, well, put me around my family, and you will see. Yeah. But I don't judge people based upon that. But I think I got one for you. Don't understand why white people make green bean salad for Thanksgiving. I've never had that. We never eat that.
Or green bean casserole.
Green bean casserole. I've never heard that ever.
It's a tradition, and you had to, like, it's the only time of the year that those French's onions that they actually sell out. And you pour it on top of it, and you put the little cream of mushroom soup in there. It's tradition. My mama used to make that. It's a Southern thing. I don't know if they do it in the North, but here in the South, green bean casserole. Yeah, it's just, and they take it to church gatherings too. Who's bringing green bean casserole? Meatloaf and green bean casserole.
That's something that we as black people, we do not do. Everything is sweet potatoes, collard greens, things like that. So we don't do the green bean casserole.
The chitlins, have you ever had those?
I used to eat those. I do not eat them anymore.
A lot of the food choices are based on the socioeconomics of it all as well. Because people often, of course, the stereotypical thing is fried chicken and watermelon. I love how Tiger Woods handled that at the Masters one year. He served fried chicken and watermelon and all the, like, stereotypical things that a black person would have, just as a joke to all the white golfers that were there.
Well, who doesn't like chicken and watermelon?
Exactly.
Fried chicken and watermelon.
In South Carolina, we got this thing called chicken and waffles.
Yeah. Who doesn't like fried chicken? I'm like, that's the totally craziest thing I've ever heard in my life.
Yeah, black people aren't the only ones that like that. I promise you.
Exactly. But I mean, I'm glad I was on. I don't think, like you said, we're going to solve anything over a day. But it helps to, if you don't understand something, go ask a black person and say, hey, well, I don't understand this, and do it in a non-offensive manner. If you want to understand more, do it in a non-offensive manner. And I think, most black people are open to saying that. And the same thing for black people. If you don't understand something, hey, go and ask a white person, hey, why do you do this or why do you do that? And because you have to, the basis for everything is to understand. If you don't understand, what that brings in is to a mechanism of fear. And I think that that's what racism revolves around, being fearful of another group of people because you don't understand them or how they do things or how they conceptualize different things.
I want to say one last thing before we get out of here. And it was triggered when you were talking about kids and the projects earlier, and you mentioned this word hope. It's ironic you said that because I was actually a part many years ago now of a ministry here in Spartanburg called Hope Ministries.
Mm-hmm.
And what it would do is go over to the projects on Saturday morning. And I'm not going to lie, the first time we started going, I was terrified. Terrified. Because
Right.
would be a drive-by shooting.
Mm-hmm.
And we're right there on the basketball court where the drive-by shooting took. You can still see the blood on the ground. It was bad. But I went because those kids are at that impressionable age where they needed somebody, an adult that they could look up to. Now, I'm whiter than white, but still I was an adult they could trust. They played basketball with us. We fed them. We read Bible stories. We did all the things to try to be a positive influence in their life. And that was some of the most gratifying volunteer work I think I've ever done in my life. And seeing these kids and what they have to go through, and the leader of the Hope Ministries would tell us some of the stories of these kids before they come in. And I'm just like, oh, like I had no idea there were kids growing up with all the stuff. I don't even want to get into the stories, but I can imagine and drive-by shootings and seeing things unspeakable happening right in front of them.
Yeah, I think, and this is one thing I had to learn, like sometimes we go out and we search for a role model because that person is our own color, and we think that because they're our own color, they're going to be able to do stuff for us or whatever, and we can identify with that person. But I've had people who have been role models who have not been my color, and they taught me a way to get out of my comfort zone and to look at things in a different manner. And I don't think that you could we talked about this at the very beginning. You can't always put everybody in a basket and think that they're one way, because I've had people within my life who have turned out to be totally different from what I thought they were. And I learned this back in a class that I was taking in for work. It was a class about public speaking. But the one impression that was left on me from the woman that was teaching the class, she said that before a person speaks, we tend to judge them, I think she said 10 to 15 times before they even say anything. And I was like, you know what? That's true. Because if I would have met you on the street, I said, Jimmy Moore is a white guy, and blah, blah, blah. I don't know anything about you, but my frame of reference that you're white. And what I started doing is I'm just like, you know what? I'm not going to judge anybody. I'm just going to let them talk. My thing, I have a 3-step method. I'm going to let you talk. If you put your foot in your mouth 3 times, then I will judge you. but yeah, but for the most part, I'm a clean slate. When I meet someone, I'm a clean slate. And I hope that I'm a clean slate to everybody else, because my mission here, I think, is my spiritual mission, is to uplift people, to enlighten people and to uplift them, and to let them know there's a different side. You don't have to look at people all in one aspect or think this person is this way because of certain things. But again, it's all about seeing a person as a spirit and not seeing them so much as a color.
So Darren, what's next? You're rebranding yourself now. Are you still in the health space, or what are you doing next?
I'm still going to be in the health space. I'm going to be incorporating more of what I've learned over the years. I think for me, getting out of people, telling people, hey, and I got out of this a long time ago, just telling people, hey, this is not the best thing to eat. You should be eating this. I think that everybody's doing that. But I think what we're not realizing is that a lot of our physical ailments and physical pain are coming from emotional things that we have gone through over a period of time. And everybody has things that they have gone through emotionally, even someone dying that you were close to, your parents telling you that you might have been fat for all your life. Don't eat that because you're going to get fat. That's an emotional trigger. And I think that we tend to look over that. And we have so many people in the health space right now talking about eat this, eat that. What about this? What about that? But no one is really talking about the mental aspect and getting your mindset correct to the fact to way you can navigate through. I think the most important thing to lose weight is get your mindset straight first, and then all other physical stuff second. So that's where I'm going with my next venture.
You are talking my language, and before we came on the air, we were talking about my childhood trauma stuff, and I've been speaking more open about it. Yeah, I just feel like those are missing pieces that if people are still struggling, it's more than a diet thing. It's more than an exercise thing. It's so many other pieces. So I'm glad to hear you doing that. What's the name of your podcast? Is it changing as well?
The name of the podcast will change. I don't want to release it yet, but my old podcast is the old podcast is Perfectly Healthy in Tone. You can still get that. That's still on Blog Talk Radio and it's on iTunes. And then the next one I'll be coming out with, I will let everybody know. But it's something I thought about for a long time. It means something to me, and hopefully everybody else will get it too. And I think it will mean something to everybody else.
Well, as you well know, anything I can do to help you in that, I hope you know I'm a friend, and I'm so grateful that you spent some time here today on the Living La Vida Low Carb Show.
I am so glad you had me on. Thank you so much.